Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohammad Fazan, and the topic of my presentation today is the advent of Europeans in subcontinent. So let's start our presentation. So to make our overall understanding easier, we divide our topic into 8 subheadings: subcontinent in the modern era, arrival of Portuguese, Dutch and the spice trade, British East India Company, interaction with the local powers, road to colonization, war of independence, and then finally the end of British invasion. When the Europeans were about to enter into the subcontinent at that point of time was not under a single ruler. It was divided into different kind of rulers having different kind of powers, structures. The most significant rulers at that point of time were Zamorin of Calicut in the south, the Sultan of Gujarat in the west, the Sultan of Delhi in the north, and the rulers of Vijayanagara Empire in the Deccan. Each region has its own power structures, values, as well as the political situation. In 1498, Vasco da Gama, a Portuguese navigator, became the first European to reach the Indian subcontinent by sea, landing at a port of Calicut on the southern west coast of India. Upon arrival, Vasco da Gama and his crew was received by the Zamorin, the ruler of Calicut, a powerful monarch who controlled the region. The Zamorin initially welcomed the Portuguese, curious about their intentions and interested in the prospect of new trade opportunities. However, the relations soon grew complex as the mutual expectations differed, especially over the trade terms and religious differences. Calicut was a major hub in the spice network that connected India to the Middle East, North Africa, Europe, known for its black pepper. It attracted the merchants from different parts of the world. The city's prominence made it an ideal landing spot for the Portuguese to begin with. The initial response from the local merchants and Zamorin's court was curious but open to trade. However, the cultural misunderstandings and the differing expectations led to the conflicts. It marked the start of British invasion. Now let's take a look at what was the actual reason or what was the need for the Portuguese to enter into the subcontinent. So the number one is definitely desire for the direct trade route. The Portuguese aimed to bypass the traditional overland trade routes controlled by the Middle Eastern empires, establishing a direct sea route to India promised more efficient and profitable trade, particularly for spices, textiles, and other luxury goods. Other than that, there was a spice demand in the Europe had a very high spice demand, such as like pepper, cloves, which was very costly due to the long trade route. So accessing these directly from India would definitely promised a huge profits. Other than that, there are also some other reasons that came inside during my research, such as economic competition with the other European powers, the spread of Christianity, expansion for Portuguese naval influence, and alliances opportunities. But we're not going to discuss that during or this presentation. The Cape of Good Hope. It is actually the path that the Vasco da Gama took to reach out to the India. It is a rocky path on the southern west coast of the South Africa, known for its strong winds, turbulent water. It was once seen as a most difficult passage but also a critical waypoint for the explorers. It became a major milestone in the age of explorations and was essential for opening a direct trade between the Europe and Asia. After the 1 year stay of the Vasco da Gama and the successful establishment of Portuguese into the trading market, many other European countries also started getting interest into the India. For example, the Dutch East India Company was established in 1602. They wanted to challenge the Arab and Portuguese traders at that point of time. They also came through the Cape of Good Hope. They established the fortified trading posts and islands in the Batavia and Jakarta, but they started getting a bit aggressive as compared to the Portuguese, who were trying to be very friendly and were in the good terms with the locals. They started doing monopoly. They started gaining the economic power, and they wanted to gain the economic power, and they were very tough competitions for the Arabs and the Portuguese. But the monopoly on the spices after a certain point of time began to break down. There were many new different kind of spices, and the many new competition from the French companies as well as the Portuguese and Arabs also started to give getting their shares back in the market, and they were very tough competition and very difficult situations for the Dutch East India Company to survive, and it finally dissolved in 1799. So it was not a very successful as compared to the British East India Company that we are going to study next. The East India Company was officially established on December 31st, 1600, when the Queen Elizabeth I of the England granted it a royal character. This character gave the company exclusive rights to trade in the East Indies, which is the Southeast Asia, for the 15 years, effectively making it only English company allowed to trade in Asia. The primary goal of the East India Company was to enter the highly lucrative space trade, which was dominated at the time by the Portuguese and Dutch. Spices like the pepper, cloves, and cinnamon were high in demand in Europe, making them extremely valuable. The company launched its first voyage to Asia in 1601 under the leadership of Captain James Lancaster. Lancaster commanded a fleet of 4 ships to set sail from England with the mission of reaching the East Indies and establishing trading relationships. In its early years, the East India Company focused on trading in spices which were highly sought after in Europe and their culinary medicines uses. As the company expanded, it began to trade other goods such as cotton, silk, tea, indigo. India and the Southeast Asia were rich in these resources, and the company sought to establish trade relationships with the locals as well as the merchants. In 1612, the East India Company established its permanent trading post or a factory in Surat on the western coast of India. This was achieved after gaining the permission from the Mughal Emperor Jahangir, who allowed the company to conduct trade in his territory. The factory of the Surat served a base for the British merchants to store goods, coordinate trade operations, interact with the local merchants and officials. The establishment of this post marked a critical step in solidifying the company's presence in India and set up for the further expansion across the subcontinent. The East India Company initially entered India as a trading entity. They wanted to trade, they wanted to establish good relationship with the local rulers to secure trading rights. By offering military assistance, forming strategic alliances, they built trust and gained influence, often used the diplomacy to gain the privileges in trade and the local governance. The company's ambition grew, leading to the armed conflicts with the local rulers. A turning point was the Battle of Plassey in 1757, where the company led by the Robert Clive defeated the Nawab of Bengal, gaining control over the Bengal's rich resources. This particular victory marked the beginning of a British political power in India, and over the next decade, the company expanded its territory through both direct and consequent alliances. With political power came economic control. The East India Company monopolized the valuable resources like tea, cotton, controlling both production and trade. They implemented high taxes on Indian farmers, diverting wealth from India to British. This exploitation led to the significant economic hardship, with traditional industries suffering and local economies becoming dependent on the British demands. And then marked one of the most major events during the British invasion, and that was the War of Independence. So it all started with a rising discontent among the Indian soldiers who were serving in the British Army. They felt exploited and disrespected by the British authorities, especially due to their cultural insensitivity. The situation gets worsened when the British introduced the infield rifles, which required the soldiers to use greased cartridges made from the animal fat. This practice offended to both Hindus as well as Muslims, leading to the widespread anger. The rebellion broke out on the May 1857, starting from the Meerut and quickly spreading to the major regions like the Delhi, Kanpur, Lucknow. Uh, Although they were very brave and they showed the true spirit, but again the rebellion lacked the unified leadership, which ultimately hindered their success. The British response was very swift and brutal. They suppressed the rebellion by 1858, but this violent crackdown has a lasting consequences. The British government decided to abolish the East India Company, which had been growing in India, established direct control over the country. This transition marked the beginning of a British Raj, where the India was the government directly by the British Crown. They appointed a viceroy to oversee the administration and supported this leadership with the British officials. However, Indian representation in the governance remained minimal, and the policies were implemented to colonize British, further integrating India into the global economy. After the War of Independence, the rebellion was ultimately suppressed, and in 1958, the British Crown took over the control of India, dissolving the East India Company. The Queen Victoria declared herself as the Empress of India, making the beginning of a British Raj, which introduced a centralized administrative structure, expanded railways, and implemented strict control over the Indian society. The British Raj continued until they gained independence in 1947, but it left a lasting impact on the India's social, economical, and the political landscapes. And now we are finally going to study how the British Raj ended. So the journey towards the independence intensified during the World War II between 1939 to 1945, which weakened the British economy and military. India contributed significantly to the war effort, and many soldiers returned with the heightened expectations for the self-rule. In 1942, the Indian National Congress launched the Quit India movement, demanding to end the British rule. Although it was met with the repression, but it unified the public sentiments against them. This led to the Mountbatten Plan proposed by the Lord Louis Mountbatten, which aimed to the partition of India into the two independent states, India and Pakistan. Pakistan on the 14th August 1947, while the India on the August 15, 1947 was declared as independent, marking the official end of the British Raj after nearly 200 years of colonial rule. While this was a momentary equation, the partition resulted into the communal violence and the mass migration. However, the end of the British Raj marked a significant turning point as the India and Pakistan emerged as the separate nations ready to embrace the challenges for the self-governance and build a democratic future.